Um,
Recording started.
Okay, there.
hey, everybody, welcome to this week's call for Tactical Sovereignty. And starting out a new year, things should be interesting. But I was asked about going over rescission of the position as agent for the organization. Somebody in the group asked that, and I thought, this isn't a bad time to go back over this. I had recently put together a couple playlists on YouTube that covers a lot of this information, so it can help people out if they go through it. Um, and I find it interesting. Friend Chris Rice, with all the interviews he does, he's been doing a lot of interviews with some really good guests past, oh gosh, year or so. And I've noticed recently, the past several months, because he's trying to figure all this out himself. The past couple months, he's been asking every guest that comes on, do you believe or not believe that there is such a thing as a juridic entity or an artificial entity that we are expected to be the representative or agent for? And so far, every one of his guests have confirmed, yes, there is. And it's interesting because every time he asks somebody, because I pretty much know all the guests that he has come on, where they stand on things. But when he asks that specific question, I kind of sit on the edge of my seat a little bit because it's like, okay, what are they going to say? Because I found very sufficient evidence of this, and they all confirm it. Everybody confirms this. And I go back to the Johnny Rivers song back, I think it was 1953, called Secret Agent Man, where he says, they've given you a number and taken away your name. And I thought, wow, how interesting they're identifying things right then. And 1953 is actually about the time the United States was adopting the Uniform Commercial Code. And it was subsequent years after that that different states got on board with following the Uniform Commercial Code, which was covering commerce and things like that. Because what I was really searching for in the beginning was, where is the nexus between us and the state? I didn't believe it was sufficient to feel that just because we were chattel that was born on the back 40 of the farm, that we automatically belonged to the goat rancher or the herder. So, and I thought there had to be a little bit more to it. And it was interesting. I was listening a few years ago to a conversation that Randy Shannon, who was the assistant admin for the original Tactical Sovereignty group that I started, she was having an interview with a gentleman by the name of KW. And he was mentioning having watched the Federal Judicial Center television, which you'll see in the backdrop behind me. You see Bruce Markell, a professor there. Over on the other side of the table, you can see the hands there of Judge Hellman. And these people, there's also Linda LaRouche there, they were discussing the revising of UCC 9. UCC 9 really covers debt instruments. It covers information regarding the debtor or the sinner, you could say, and location of sinner, or I should say location of debtor, and getting the correct legal name of the individual when it comes to filing liens, which is also a large part of what UCC 9 is covering. And I'm calling this episode this evening the agency or the birth certificate. I think it could probably also be subtitled Secret Combinations. And secret combinations is something probably about a year ago that I started researching, because secret combinations is really how a lot of the societies will tie people in or bind people in. And these combinations aren't something that is performed all at once. So they're things that normally happen little by little. which has happened in our life. Little things have happened, subtle things, one step at a time. And next thing you know, you've got your foot in the bear trap and you're wondering, how did my foot get there? I think people can realize that as well, watching things that have happened the past couple of years. It's very interesting watching how things progress. And with secret combinations, I was thinking back to my childhood when I was about 12, 13 years old, and a new bicycle I had just bought to take like a 1,200-mile trip on through the Northeast. And I had a lock on it. And I thought it was funny. I can still remember to this day what that combination was for it. It was 3, 29, 13. Those numbers aren't significant other than the thought that on those dial master locks, it's always a set of 3 numbers. And we see things happen in sets of 3 quite a lot in life. I've even stood in court and heard an attorney try and hold a judge to a specific statute. And the judge would wiggle around and say, well, yeah, I've never followed that statute. Even though it's regarding this situation, I've never followed that. And he said, well, it's written in the statute. That's really what we're supposed to be following. And the judge even turned to the opposing side and to the state prosecutor and said, to the prosecutor, do you ever remember me ever following that statute? And I'm thinking on the back of my head at the time, what are you doing as a judge? You're trying to get the prosecutor to back you up on how you're going to rule? I thought, how bizarre is this? And then the judge actually got up at that time and left the courtroom, went back to the Holy of Holies. I'm sure she consulted with another maybe mentor judge or colleague and came back and sat down, and her ruling followed that statute. It took 3 times to do it. But it's interesting, we see a lot of things that occur in 3s. And so really in looking at what this situation is, what this nexus is between us and the state, I found it interesting when Obama left the presidency. A reporter asked him, what are you going to do now that you're leaving the presidency? And he just made one very simple statement. He said, I'm going to return to the office of private citizen. And little ding, 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 bells went off in the back of my head because he said the office of private citizen. And it is, it's an office that's held. And there is a time and a place where that office is created at. And I had already stumbled upon that at this time, but to me, this was just a little bit more confirmation on that. So anyway, I covered basically the things that UCC 9 covers. And I've got a clip on the YouTube channel and in the group. I've got it also on a couple playlists, but it talks about requirements of the state. And to me, this is like one of those sets of 3 digits of numbers for a combination. And the requirement is that the state is required to maintain a record that an organization has been organized and the registered organization exists. And this is the duty of the state, maintaining that record. And it was one of the gentlemen you see seated behind me, he piped up and said, yeah, I've heard that referred to as a birth certificate. And the attorney that was there kind of tried to derail him, I think, a little bit away from that topic. But if you go into Vital Stats, also, and they have their own blog. And I remember reading in there, there was somebody asking about use of the birth certificate as identification, which numerous times we see that it's not to be used as identification. In fact, the local Social Security Administration office here, at each of their little windows where you can go in to speak to one of their agents, they have a little sign taped to the plexiglass on each one of these windows that said, and it's underlined, we never accept the birth certificate as identification. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So is what Social Security is doing, are they doing this for that organization, for the birth certificate, or are they doing it for the living man or woman? That's just something that kind of clicked in the back of my head. But when we look at the registered organizations, you have to realize each one, a registered organization, is required to have an address for its service of process, notice, and demand. For people that haven't heard that, service of process is, think of just the basic mail that you receive from different companies, utilities, and things like that in the mailbox. That's a service of process. Even being served letters from a process server, that's service of process. And when you're receiving service of process for notice and demand, well, notice and demand, those are those bills you get in the mail. You're given a notice and demand for payment. All right. And so that to me is the second set of numbers in a secret combination, is the address. And when you look at the certificate of live birth, number one, a lot of people automatically think because the name they use is on it means that this document pertains to them, which is absolutely not true. And if you just read the document, it's very easy to discover that, because that document, if you'll notice, looks very, very similar to that certificate of title that you have in the vehicle. It also looks very identical to the certificate or the license of operation for a business. I remember being with a friend of mine, and we were at a business one day, and I pointed up on the wall. I said, what's that look like up there to you? And he looked at it, and he was just like, oh my God, that's a birth certificate. I said, exactly. It's the same thing. This is your token to operate in commerce. And that document, though, like I said, obviously has nothing to do with you, even though it has a name that looks similar to yours. Some people say that it's spelled wrong because it's in all caps, which is not true. I remember listening to a trial one time, and the individual was asking the judge to have their name spelled correctly on the documents. And the judge turned to the clerk and was like, clerk, what do you think? Yeah, will you change the name correctly? Will you spell it correctly? And the clerk said, it is spelled correctly. And the judge said, okay, never mind, moving forward. And the reason why is because, yes, it is spelled correctly. It's just styled different. It's the style of the grammar. So when I hear people talk about the spelling, I just kind of shake my head a little bit. But when you're looking at this document and you think of the document you have, the certificate of title for the vehicle, that certificate of title for the vehicle is going to say on it, for instance, the vehicle, or one of the vehicles I use, is a Crown Victoria made by Ford. Guess what it says on the certificate of title? It's a Ford model Crown Victoria. Go look at your certificate of live birth. Does it say who or what that certificate is for? It may say male or female, but those are scientific words. The certificate of live birth at one time used to use boy or girl. I don't think you ever see anybody have a baby and they're handing out cigars and signs that say it's a female, it's a boy, it's a girl. I mean, it's a man or woman. That's what it comes down to. Which that's the first sign right there. That certificate of live birth is not for man or woman. They're using a scientific term, male or female. On there also, is it saying a male or female what? A duck, a dog, a prize horse? Horses have birth certificates too, by the way. That way they can follow the lineage of a horse, of a champion racing horse, of a trotter, or something like that. And it'll even say on those certificates that it's for a horse. And I'll say the breed of the horse. There is nothing on the certificate of live birth that says human or breed of human. All of that is kind of left very ambiguous, which tells you, you know what? This is obviously for an artificial or juridic entity, because artificial or juridic entities do not have human qualities. They are just a cartoon character, to put it best. And they'll have two different dates also on that certificate of live birth. I'm coming to strongly believe that the date on there that we have been using has been very incorrect. If you are in fact representing that organization that the certificate of live birth represents, proving that an organization was organized and registered with a copy maintained by the state. We very often use the date that the boy or girl manifested physical into this world, when really the date that's important on that certificate of live birth is the date that the organization was organized and registered, and it will have the registration date on there. I've heard from a very good source that going into Social Security and changing their information on their SS5 even had made some differences when they changed the date of birth from that born day to the birthday, which is the registration of the organization. But I'm going to get into Social Security in a couple more minutes here yet. And Keith has some stuff to add to that. But to me, that was the third set of numbers in these secret combinations. So what were those three combinations? Like I said, when I was like 12, 13, my combination was 3, 29, 13 on my lock. Well, what do they want now? This is really a military action. And what do they want from military personnel if they're captured? Name, rank, serial number. 3 things. Well, what are the 3 things that is being represented here? 1, there's name of an organization. There's a date of birth for the organization, and there's an address for the organization. I remember about 2 years ago, I had an interaction with a police officer, and it was just a couple blocks back behind my house, and they came up and wanted to ask me a couple questions that I didn't too freely want to talk to them about. And they were asking me if I had any ID on me, which I never carry any identification on me, period. And I said, well, I could go back to my house and see if I can find something for you. And they're like, no, that's all right. They said, just let us know your name, your date of birth, and your address. I thought, boy, same thing. Just like those 3 secret combinations to a lock. You know, your name, date of birth, address. Just like the military action. Your name, rank, and serial number. That leads them to everything that they need right there. So using this information, you are essentially agreeing to being the agent for that organization, and that you're going to be receiving service of process for that organization. Even the United States has a company that accepts service of process for them. It's called the United States Corporation Company. Sometimes it's just called the Corporation Company. A lot of people stumble across that information and they think, oh, this is United States Inc. right here. We found it. This is a jackpot. No, it's not. That's just their agent for service of process, notice and demand. And in fact, they're even a perfect example that the states are all just franchises of the United States, because you'll find an office for the corporation company in the capital city of every state. They all have one, which makes sense because as franchises, the U.S. needs an agent for its service of process located at each one of the state capitals, which to me just falls into place right there. So if you go into vital stats and you read through what they talk about there, they're going to mention not only that it is not supposed to be used as identification, but that the certificate is nothing but evidence of a citizen. And I would strongly say that that piece of paper is the citizen. The citizen cannot be anything physical. A citizen is a man-made idea, a man-made thought. Mom and dad didn't get together one night and over a bottle of wine and say, "Hey, let's make a citizen." You know, that's just not how it works. And what's the best way, really, to take care of this situation with this organization? Well, if you contact Social Security Administration and ask them to get rid of the Social Security number, first off, they're going to kind of laugh at you. But then what they say to you every time is they just simply say, well, just stop using it. It's your use of it that shows validation for it. And one of the things that I've heard people bitch about a lot, and it just kind of shows me, their level of research or thinking, at least, is in looking at the certificate of live birth. They say, well, it's kind of like a contract, and I was a baby at the time, and so I'm not old enough to contract at that time. Yes, you are, because your parents are the ones that give that information over. They're the ones that are at that time acting as your agent. They have control over the minor. So yes, it's okay for them to do that. In fact, they do that many times through life, even enrolling you into school, into kindergarten, into first grade, and all the other grades after that. But at the same time, even if you had signed it, there's nothing wrong with it. Because most of us all start, off in life, going out thinking it's all cool to get a driver's license. How old are you then? 15 years old? You're contracting with the state. You're contracting with the Department of Motor Vehicles. You're contracting with the county. You're signing a contract there. You're 15 years old. Many of us, 14, 15 years old, are starting jobs. Well, you're starting a job. You're filling out the IRS paperwork. Well, what are you doing? You're contracting with your employer. You're contracting with the federal government. You're contracting with the IRS. So even though you're only 15, 16 years old and you're not 18 years old yet, what you're signing ends up being very valid. So yeah, it is okay for you to enter into contract under the age of 18. So that's kind of a ridiculous idea that people have. But when I mentioned like the driver's license as well, if you read into this, and what I say all the time is that we need to realize that whenever our signature is required, there's only one reason why it would be required. It's because there's a contract somewhere. You are getting involved in a contract. And part of the contract for a driver's license is you are agreeing to be, where's that word again? Agent for service of process in matters relating to that driver's license. So right there, you're agreeing to be agent. We're doing all these things, like I said, step by step by step. Even with the parents, kicking things off. And they're really not listed as parents. They're technically a legal custodian. What do parents fight over after a divorce? They aren't really fighting for parental rights. Legally, they're fighting for custodianship. Who's going to be the legal custodian? And what is a custodian? A custodian is someone who cares for the property of another. So it's almost like they're admitting that you're not their property. Crazy, crazy stuff. But Keith had a couple of things. I've got a lot more to go into, but before I get too far away from Social Security, Keith had some information he wanted to bring forward on that. Feel free, bro. You'll just have to unmute yourself. That's the only thing.
That works, doesn't it? As Brian was saying, it's mom
that initiated the assignment of a social security number to a newborn child. And that assignment is basically, as it states in their laws, a agreement that we may make with the state official to provide a procedure for assisting us to assign a social security number. So mom didn't do the assignment. She only signed a document errantly as a signature when there was no requirement for a signature. It was just, she could have just put down her name in block letters. It says informant. It does not say you're supposed to sign. It just says informant. So when you signed, it was automatically instituted anyway, regardless of how you sign or anything. The thing is that birth registration is an agreement between the federal government and the state, succinctly and clearly assigning a number. And then it goes on to say that name and number identify the record. It will never identify mom. It will never identify her baby. It will identify the record, and that's it. In that social security assignment of the number when you're born, you turn 18 and you fill out an SS5. Now, the birth registration goes to the United States, whereas the application of the SS5 is what opens that number. That's opening the account for its use. It was established 18 years prior, so it could gain interest on the money that sits in there as a stored value to use for loans. So then you turn around and you fill out this SS5, and that's one numitant record. It's the initial numitant record. And at that point, if one does not correct the birth registration for its falsity, it gets entered into the record. And because of the way it's entered, everything from that point on gets entered into a claim record for the continuation of that record until there's a death record. So you have
Keith, can I add to that?
Sure.
Yeah, it just caused me to remember something here, recall something. Here a few months ago, I was doing some experimenting around, and still am, with some of the records that the state holds. And I was looking at the Social Security account. And like you mentioned, when you fill out the SS5 and you're applying for that number is not created then. That number is created at the time you're born. That information actually in Black's law means someone with knowledge of a crime. That's what an informant is, right? But that information goes to the federal government, and at that time, they create the Social Security number at that point. And the best way I can show evidence of that was, like I said, I was doing some looking around in the records here a few months ago, and I noticed that the Social Security number assigned to my organization had a listing there of when it started earning profits. And it started earning profits when I was, I believe, either 11 or 12 years old. And I thought, wait a minute, this is interesting. This is perfect evidence right here, because I didn't start working a employment job for another worker until I was about 15 and a half years old. And it was at that time that my father, my biological father here on Earth, sent off the SS5 for Social Security card for me. So right there, that's evidence that for almost 4 years prior to that, that Social Security number had already been earning money prior to me ever depositing anything to it or even having the card.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and that's the way it works. And then when you put that SS5 in, like I said, if you don't make it a correction at that point and collapse that trust, it continues on as a public trust, and you are treated as the public trustee. You are now acting as the trustee, putting claims on the record. Okay. And like I said, that lasts until you get a death record. Okay. That's the SS5 numitant, the claim numitant, and the death numitant. Now, according to what Brian just said, I also had a similar experience of working before I was 18. However, I started when I was 10, doing paper routes and stuff. And I had an actual bank account, and I was writing checks off of my account and stuff, but everything was like a custodianship where my mom and dad had to have a co-account. I couldn't have the account myself. So in that situation, whereas I was a minor and I couldn't put a claim on a record, so it had to go through mom and dad's account. And that put it on the claim record for my income as a minor. See how that works? See, it skips the minor doing the minor accounting as a minor by requiring a custodian account connected to it so that they can transfer it to the presumption of a claim as a income. Now it becomes taxable. Yeah. Funny stuff. So anyway, you get down to the realization that mom made a statement without any qualification. That form that had that information on there is not concise in English, and so there was no qualifying statement, none. In order for that birth certificate to be valid, it has to have first a handwritten statement from mom with her intent to hand over the estate of her son or daughter's person to the United States for them to be trustee. And then the state has to file a certification of compliance in order to do that. Now, the state has an automatic certification of compliance stating that, yeah, they're in compliance because everybody's giving us this information. Yet nobody realizes that certification of compliance cannot be possible because in all cases, for a certification of compliance to be valid, there must first be a certification of application and intent to have an external entity apply to the system.
Well, Keith, to add to that, there's also a period of tacit acquiescence that occurs as well.
Correct.
Because after that certificate of live birth is created, a copy of it gets sent to the parents if they, are able to provide a good address or whatever to the hospital. They'll receive a copy of it, and along with that copy, there is a letter, and the letter says that they have to look this over, make sure everything is true and correct on it. If there's any problems, that they need to notify the State Department of Health or Vital Statistics within 10 days. So right there's 10 days of tacit acquiescence. Nobody says anything. So what do? They just keep rolling right along as though everything is cool. And, this is really the beginning of the stage of indoctrination for everybody, where they end up playing the role technically of a cartoon character through, call it personification, I guess is exactly what it is that you're breathing life into an artificial entity. And, thinking about cartoon characters, it always reminds me, you see those hieroglyphs on the pyramids and ancient artifacts in Egypt, and you'll see that they're done like in strips, and they tell a picture. And what they call those over there, they refer to those as cartoons, cartoos, just too identical to the cartoons that we see in our newspaper. So
that's where they got it.
Yeah, not much has changed. That's exactly where it came from.
And that's basically what happens with all of their laws, guys. They get all of their laws from ancient writings, ancient scripture and stuff, because that's they can't create anything new. All they can do is twist what is to make people believe something different than what is real. That's it.
And even with finding this information on judicial television, I also try keeping my eyes and ears open to things that go on in real life. And, in real life, you realize that even at work, your boss isn't just Bob Jones. He's actually the manager for a certain company. That's a hat he's wearing. Same exact situation. And even in court, I remember sitting and listening to a court case one time. I was there physically just checking things out. And it was a guardianship case. And in this guardianship case, guardians, there's two levels of guardians. You can be like a family member or a friend who has taken guardianship classes and becomes a guardian, or you can be somebody that does it professionally. Sometimes attorneys do this as well. They specifically do it for very rich clients because I guess as a professional guardian, there's more billable hours you're able to assign to the people because you're doing it as a professional. And there's paperwork that you've got to fill out. I've gone and taken the course. Course for a regular guardian is like 8 hours, something like that. Whereas for a professional guardian, and this all probably depends on your state, professional guardian, the class might be 16 hours or 12 hours. But there's two sets of paperwork that have to be filled out. And this relates to the court case I'm going to mention. There's two sets of paperwork you have to fill out. One set of paperwork talks about what does, and they refer to these people as the consumer. Okay, what does the consumer do in their time? What are their habits? Do they have a job? Do they have friends? Just kind of basic stuff like that about their regular life. And then the second set of paperwork that goes along with it is paperwork that deals with their finances and their beginning and ending budget at the end of their guardianship term. How much money did they have? What kind of products did they have in our house? What kind of things have they bought? And at the end of the year, what are those things valued at? And then you get a bottom line of what the net and gross value of that consumer is. Okay, so now that second set of paperwork is for the person. The first set of paperwork talking about their daily habits and their life, that's for the individual. Okay, well, I'm listening to this court case, and the family was wanting to transfer guardianship from a professional guardian who was an attorney to a family member. And the judge asked them, well, tell me about the consumer. So they went on to talk about, they like going out horseback riding. They have friends that come over. They have birthday parties. They go out to the movies together. And as this woman was talking, the judge stopped her kind of in her tracks and said, no, 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 no. She said, I don't care about the individual. I only care about the person. That's what the court wants to hear about. She said, actually, her exact words were, neither I nor the court care about the individual. We only care about the person. And I looked around and I saw people's heads nodding up and down. I'm like thinking, you idiots don't even know what this judge is referring to. And neither did this lady, because she was kind of stumped. And so the judge had to go on and ask her, okay, well, how much money do they earn? Do they have a bank account? What are they receiving as benefits from the state and through Social Security? And then the lady understood what the judge was wanting to find out from her. And to me, that was just a clear sign. Once again, another light bulb moment. Yep, there's definitely a difference between you and your cartoon character, between the individual and the person. And before anybody really gets hung up on terms and definitions of terms, let me tell you something. You've got to know the entity you're dealing with, the situation you're dealing with, to know what those definitions are. Because individual will not mean the same thing, say, in that court case setting, as it will in a court case setting that's dealing with taxes. In a court case setting that's dealing with taxes, the term individual means something completely different. Okay, so it all of these different places where, or whether it's military, any area, you have to know the context of what you're dealing with, and then look and see what those definitions mean to those people in that situation, in that scenario, because they don't mean the same thing across the board. And I've even heard the judges mention before that they see you and the person as one and the same, which to me right there is where you're seeing this black robe magic occur. All right. They're seeing you and that artificial entity, that juridic entity, that organization as being one and the same. That is, like I said, right, nothing more than personification. To me, that is dark magic right there, because it is impossible for Christopher Reeves to literally be Superman. That was just a character he played. Same situation as this. Okay, and I've mentioned Hamlet before. If you go to Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1, he's frustrated there because he says, in the position of, say, like God, saying, I have given you one face, but you make for yourself another. And that's exactly what mankind has done. They've been given one face, one persona by their creator, but instead they've put on a false mask, a false face of something that is man-made.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Brian, because I just did a video today on concise construction. And so I have with me my book, Concise English Handbook. And from it, I read a portion of Hamlet. And it says Hamlet was as a thinker. According to Coleridge, in 1818, Shakespeare meant to show the need for a healthy balance between observation and thought, what you see and how you correlate it, between reality and the world of imagination. In Hamlet, this balance is disturbed. His thoughts and images of his fancy are far more vivid than these actual perception. This is what's happening in the legal system today. The legal language is far more vivid than its actual perception. Hence, we see a great and almost enormous intellectual activity, people going mad, insane, trying to figure this out, and proportionate aversion to real action. Because they are so confused, there's a proportionate aversion to not act. That's why people continue going into the courts, because they think that's what they're supposed to do. Well, that's the aversion to the real action of acquiescence. See, you mentioned acquiescence earlier, and what we find out is that if we just quit paying taxes, there's a presumption on the record that if you just quit communicating, then you're presumed to have returned to your private foundation. It's presumed that you are a private foundation.
Yeah, they actually recognize that. They'll use the initials NF, which stands for non-filer. That doesn't mean that you've died or anything like that. No, it just means you've made a choice. Yeah, you've changed your election. You've changed your choice of what you're going to do about your finances.
Yep. And it goes on to say, it is he, or it is we who are Hamlet. Whoever has become thoughtful and melancholy through his own mishaps or those of others, whoever has borne about with him the clouded brow of reflection. So when you keep taking on that personage in anger and frustration and trying to figure it out, you're being the Hamlet. You're the one bringing it about by not realizing it is nothing but a total fiction. And realize, people, personal jurisdiction. For the court to obtain personal jurisdiction, the defendant must voluntarily appear in court. If you volunteer to appear in court, you are then the defendant. Quit. That's their own law. Personal jurisdiction. For the court to obtain personal jurisdiction, the defendant must appear voluntarily in court.
Well, and everything they do is voluntary. This is really your voluntary servitude. Sure, slavery was outlawed, but that's called involuntary servitude. Involuntary servitude is strictly prohibited, but voluntary servitude is perfectly okay. You can volunteer for anything you want, whether it's to get a poke in the arm or to wear something or to have to carry a piece of paper. Those things are all voluntary. But we need to go into, I guess, what some people would see as remedy. I don't like to use the word remedy. In maritime law, there's 3 stages. There's salvage, then there's remedy, and then the 3rd stage is cure. I prefer not to put on a Band-Aid, but move into cure. And so what can you do? As I stated earlier, Obama said that he was going to return to the office of private citizen. Well, what does an office holder do if he does not want to hold office anymore? He resigns.
Yep.
When these big corporations get in trouble for things that they are doing, what do the heads of the companies do? They resign. And then, interestingly, 3 or 4 weeks later, all of a sudden they're a CEO of a different corporation somewhere else. They just kind of bounce them around, you know. So what are the things that you can do as a cure? Well, you can resign. That's actually what I really recommend. Some people want to get deeper into it though, because they think somehow they're going to profit off from it. Myself, I know any of those profits are profits, PROF, that are coming from false prophets, PROPHETS. And I don't want the profits from the false prophets. I don't want their blood money. So one of the things you can also do to continue in commerce, well, what does the Constitution say? You have the right to be protected in your papers and your persons. And it says persons plural. That means you can have more than one. You can create yourself a person through doing a DBA. You can create an entity that you're going to operate through that way. There's people, for instance, who own multiple companies. They also have DBAs in all those different companies. Those are their multiple persons. And a lot of people look at that and talk about that a lot. But one of the things I think that people haven't paid enough attention to is the first part that the Constitution mentions, the security of your papers. Well, what are your papers? We know these are all attorneys that have written all this stuff. So they've got their own definitions. So if you look at a legal definition of papers, your papers are securities, and they are also your money. Your chattel paper is considered the papers that you're supposed to be securing, which means nobody can just come and snatch it away from you without good reason. And I would say even a step further, using your own private papers, your own private scripts, like crypto and things like that.
Well, I just posted the thing on Burn in the chat section because that's what it goes to. When we look at the preambles to the Treaty of Berne, the preambles to international instruments have normally no legal significance and scarcely call for commentary. Usually they merely indicate by means of a few recitals the objective of the treaty. Now, the Section 2 was the preamble to the Berne Convention follows this tradition. It underlines the desire of countries bound by the convention to protect in a manner as effective and uniform as possible the rights of authors in their literary and artistic works. And that's relative to your papers, your persons in your papers. That's the only place your persons exist is in your papers. The only place your papers should exist is in your house. The only one that should be in your house is you and the other children of God. That's why I quit everything, almost 6 years ago, because I realized everything I was doing was liability. Everything I was doing, all the writing that I was entering, I wasn't constructing it properly. And so in that improper construction, I incorporated my own liability with theirs because theirs isn't constructed properly either. Like I said, they will not use concise English. And Plain Writing Act talks about concise English.
Absolutely. And, a lot of people are going to say that, oh, well, you shouldn't have to do this. You shouldn't have to do that. Well, I'm sorry. Step by step through life on paper, by signing, you have entered into contract with these makers of that blood money. All right. And so, yes, guess what? It's going to require some work and paperwork. Yep, I'm sorry, because that's what was used to get you in. That's also what can be used to get you out. And, if they can go out and create an entity for you to operate through, I basically look at it as like a debit card. That's the nexus between you and the bank, right?
Yep.
That's what your person is. Well, if they can create one for you to operate through, then why can't you operate one yourself? Why can you not create one yourself if they can do it? Because whatever authority they supposedly have comes from what's referred to as popular sovereignty. The sovereignty of all the people has been transferred to them, in their opinion. So If they're operating with one little tiny slice or nugget of your sovereignty, then guess what? You hold a whole lot more. You hold a whole lot more because they only grab a little piece from you.
Yeah, I just, excuse me, I just completed this last week with PayPal. I finally got PayPal to realize I need a private routing, because when you guys take that money in from the other end and you accumulate it on your record and then report me to the IRS as if though I'm making income through sales and purchases of goods and services, you're making a false statement, and you're putting that false statement on a claim record that you don't have any business putting it on. Because I guarantee you, when you contact the Social Security Administration and you ask them if you can place a liability on that record, they're going to tell you no. Now, what you've done is you contracted with the IRS through an information exchange to turn around and come back with information that the IRS communicated back to you, telling you to get a hold of me and file taxes. Ain't going to happen. I can't file taxes, because just like you can't call up Social Security Administration and ask them if you can put liability on that record, neither can I. I've already issued my statement of separation saying I can't do that again, because I am not, in fact, a resident qualified to do so.
Well, you also are not required to testify against yourself, are you?
Correct.
And that's exactly what that is doing. That is, filling out that paperwork is testifying against yourself, testifying against the person they created, actually. So what are you doing? You're putting liability on them.
Yeah, and that's what I had to get PayPal to recognize, is that I am a private foundation under 26 CFR 1.508-1, presumption of private foundation. The presumption already exists because I did not communicate with IRS. Now that PayPal turned around and reported me to IRS, they're expecting now that I'm going to communicate with IRS and say I'm established as an organization and need to file taxes. No, that breaks the presumption of a private foundation. I can't do that. You're telling me to do something that's impossible.
Well, even in the Internal Revenue Code, they see the taxpayer as a sole proprietorship. Well, you know what? If they're going to see you as a sole proprietorship, then guess what? How about start acting like one?
Yeah. But see, again, the problem with that is under the laws of the United States, in those courts, those administrative courts, you have to be represented by an attorney. And according to the rules, you can't hire an attorney unless you're organized and have a board of directors, because only a board of directors can hire an attorney. Now, a board of directors belongs to an organization called a firm. A firm is somebody that makes investments.
Yep. Well, you were looking at the chat there, Keith. Did you see any questions in there?
Let's see here. Nope.
All right. Well, I think this has been a good evening, and
Sed's got one. Sed just came up, said he's got one. Go ahead, Sed.
Everybody's muted right now. So let me jump over to Sed. Let me go find him. Oh, that's not the place to find him at. All right, I will find you, Sed. All right, you are just here with a telephone number. So, let us know in the chat what your area code is. Oh, never mind. I found him. All right, Sed, you're unmuted. What's going on with you, bro?
Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening. Sorry about that. So you mentioned a point there about starting an L. So I'll get to the point. So I just started an LLC, right? And so I'm running all of my business and all of my everything through that LLC that I created. I also did unincorporated sole proprietorship under my all caps name. But I want to get rid of the agency there with that. One of the things that I read was that in order to do that, you would have to practically write a letter of resignation yourself and send it via whether it's registered mail or some type of mail back to yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah, and because looking through United States Code, it constantly states in there, according to the secretary, or as the secretary allows, or as permitted by the secretary. So that told me right there who we got to communicate with, and so that's where my resignation went to. It went to the secretary, because the secretary also, when you look at their duties, they're the ones that are the holders of all titles, bonds, certificates, etc. So
Okay. So
and I do want to mention though, in looking into different things to set up, and I prefer myself not setting up something under like the IRS or the Treasury or whatever, although you can look at their guidelines as to how you want to name it and how you want to set something up. But I don't recommend an LLC, and the reason why is because if anybody you're dealing with has an issue with you and chooses to sue your LLC, you are not allowed to go in there, sui juris or pro se. You are required to hire an attorney. Only an attorney can represent an LLC.
okay.
Can you guys see my?
Yes.
Yes.
You can see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Okay. On the screen here, what we have is 19 U.S. Code 81.0, Residence of Zone. This is the Customs Code, according to the Customs Bureau, related to the Bureau of Vital Statistics, the State Bureau of Investigation, Federal Bureau of Investigations, U.S. Department of State Bureau of Bureau of Consular Affairs, and the Director General of the International Bureau of the International Parliamentary Union under the auspices of the Universal Postal Union. Persons allowed to reside in the zone. No person shall be allowed to reside within the zone. The zone is a foreign trade zone, except for federal, state, or municipal officers or agents whose resident presence is, this is the qualifying statement, is deemed necessary by the board. The board, Bureau of Vital Statistics, is regulated by the Department of Commerce. At the state level and the federal level, the board is the term. Board means the board which is established to carry out the provisions of this chapter, the customs through the state and the federal government, through those custom borders. The board shall consist of the Secretary of Commerce, who shall be chairman and executive officer of the board, and the Secretary of the Treasury. So the executive is the Secretary of Commerce, and then you've got the Secretary of Treasury. Those are the two people I would make sure I mention to. I would also mention it to the Department of Homeland Security as a matter of redress of the address, because the service process is going to the wrong address. It should be going to the Social Security Administration and not the beneficiary. And the problem is that because people are using, let me get my screen back up, because people are using a name and address rather than
And I would say that that's the zip also. The zip is federal, and zip stands for, because it's it's in all caps. Whenever you see something in all caps, it's an acronym.
So that
zip stands for
does it include
zone improvement plan.
Care of? I use
so
everything I have a personal mailbox, and I use care of for everything.
Right. That's awesome that you use care of. Okay, now 19 CFR 149.3 says data elements. And in those data elements is a shipper, or excuse me, a buyer, a seller, and a shipper, or ship to party. Ship to party is the one at the end of the line, the one that's receiving the goods or services. And a name and address of the first delivered party scheduled to physically receive the goods after the goods have been released from customs custody. Okay. A widely recognized, commercially accepted identification number for this party may be provided in lieu of the name and address. Now, people all their lives been taught to learn how to write their name down so they can sign it and remember their address. Don't ever give the social security number out. When in fact, we're supposed to give the social security number out in lieu of the name and address. Because when you give a name and address, that address is a service address for somebody known as a resident who evidently is a federal, state, or municipal officer or agent without an oath of office and without a determination, without the resident presence being determined by the Secretary of the Treasury or the Secretary of Commerce. Because I ain't never seen him or talked to him.
All right.
Well, and that was one of the reasons I listed on my resignation, is because of lack of correspondence with the principal. Now, what you're showing there, Keith, is the standard way, that the way everybody's living now, that's what they should really be using. However, if you are no longer the agent for service of process for that organization, then all that stuff right there really goes out the window.
Well, no, here, let me show you. Let me go
Because your principal is no longer the Secretary of State or Social Security Administration. They're no longer the principal.
Well, here, I'll show you. Under that same one, 3, importer of the record. Foreign trade zone applicant identification number, Internal Revenue Service number, employer identification number, Social Security number, or CBC or CBP assigned number of the entity liable for payment of all duties and responsible for meeting all statutory and regulatory requirements incurred as a result of importation. They're the ones that imported the data elements. They're the ones holding the record. They are the liability. They're the ones that hold the liability. So even if you say that you're not, and they try to profess that you are, they're the ones that hold the record saying that you are. So it proves that they're the liability. They're the holder of the liability.
If they're claiming to be the principal, then they're going to ultimately hold the liability as well, if they want to claim that position.
Yeah, see, that's that catch-22 of them trying to enforce something. They're claiming to be the principal.
Well, when we have to realize that everything they write is for the juridic persons. They don't write anything for the natural man or woman. All that stuff is for the juridic person, for that organization or artificial entity.
Yep.
Well, we've hit an hour here, Keith. Thanks everybody. And you want to sign out with anything, Keith?
Just pay attention as always, folks. I've been putting a lot of good information out. If you go see my page, you'll see I've been, like I talked about, I mentioned Hamlet today in my video about the various different nouns in relations to Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, and Tom Sawyer. Learn how the story is written and how everything written is a legal fiction. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether it's legal or law. It's still fiction.
Absolutely. And I'll add to this as well. Apart from the resignation as agent, is that I think many people have read the citation that the citizen is the co-trustee of a trust, right? So if it's a co-trustee of a trust, who is the other part of this? I would say this organization is also probably really closer specified as a partnership, yes, especially when they're mentioning co-trustee. So who would the other trustee be? The trustees of the United States is your representatives. And there's a representative in each district, district being a military term as well. And so what has happened is that being a registered voter, whether you've never voted or not, it doesn't matter. You're still on their rolls. If you've got a driver's license, your name automatically got put on the rolls. And they are the other half of this equation. They are the other half of the co-trustee. And so I also recommend rescinding the voter's registration, because we know that's all just a sham anyway. All that is to tie you in to this relationship as co-trustee over the organization that they created. Bottom line. All right, guys. Well, I guess every week, where do you learn? Well, learn who you really are, where you're really from, and where you're really at. Because we've been deceived on all 3 levels.
Yes, sir. And remember, if it weren't for you guys, I wouldn't be doing this. God bless. Have a great night.
See y'all.